essentially the whole of Taliban-controlled Afghanistan to hide in, and he has the support of a lot of people here. He could be hidden away in any village, in any mountain hideaway, in any household compound here. So it'd be very difficult to find him, and very difficult for troops to operate here without the support of Pakistan, which would be essential if a ground force was to be used here, John.
Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan, thank you very much. We'll check in with you a bit later in the day. I want to continue the conversation now with Peter Bergen, a CNN terrorism analyst, someone who knows the bin Laden organization quite well. Mr. Bush saying if he thinks he can hide, he will be sorely mistaken. Implies the United States, if it reaches the conclusion, Mr. Bush said he was the prime suspect, if the president gets to the next threshold and names him as the suspect and goes after him, easier said than done?
Easier said than done for the following reasons, John. Afghanistan is a country of mountains and deserts where it's pretty easy to hide, and bin Laden has operated in Afghanistan since 1986. It's a country he knows intimately well. It's a country, he spent 3 years inside the country fighting the Soviets, exactly the kind of conventional operation that there might be implicit in some of these statements. He's not exactly frightened of these kinds of things. The psychology of this man is somebody who rejoices in the possibility of being martyred in the cause of Islam. I think he's going to be a difficult person to intimidate for that reason.
The U.S. government says Mr. bin Laden is a man capable of these terrorist strikes, a man capable of having terrorist cells that can hijack planes and indeed fly them into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon. But what about on the ground in Afghanistan? If U.S. troops were deployed there, what does Mr. bin Laden have at his disposal in terms of men and weapons on the ground?
John, I met with him in '97, and this was just for a television interview for CNN, and he had at least a couple of dozen heavily armed men. They had RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, they had submachine guns. These are people who are prepared to die for him, and that was just for a television interview. Obviously, he's going to be much more prepared. He has hundreds, perhaps thousands of followers in Afghanistan. It's going to be a very tricky proposition.
What about the regional balance quickly? The Taliban threatening Pakistan if it helps the United States. What is the potential impact of that?
I think Pakistan is in a very, very hard place because Osama bin Laden is a popular man for a lot of Pakistanis. The Pakistani government is in a very tough situation. They've long been allies of the United States, yet bin Laden is somebody who enjoys a lot of popularity on the street in Pakistan. So I think General Musharraf is going to have a very tough few weeks ahead of him.
All right, and we will keep tabs on this as it develops. Now back to Paul Azan in New York.
All right, John, probably nothing shows the sense of loss that New Yorkers feel today, and for perhaps the rest of America, as we focus in on the funeral of New York City Fire Department chaplain, Michael Judge, who will be laid to rest today. It's a devastating story. Here was a man who was performing last rites to a fallen firefighter, and in the process lost his own life. The mayor telling us some 300 firefighters are among the missing in the World Trade Center attacks. In some cases, entire companies were lost after firefighters responded to the first attack and were killed in the second. Let's pause for a moment.
He was, without knowing it, my mentor, and I was his pupil. I watched how he dealt with people. He really was a people person. While the rest of us were running around organizing altar boys and choirs and liturgies and decorations, he was in his office listening. His heart was open, his ears were opened, and especially he listened to people with problems. He carried around with him an appointment book. He had appointments to see people 4 and 5 weeks in advance. He would come to the rec room at night at 11:30, just finished his last appointment. Because when he related to a person, and you all know this, they felt like he was their best friend. When he was talking with you, you were the only person on the face of the earth. And he loved people, and that showed, and that made all the difference. You can serve people, but unless you love them, it's not really ministry. In fact, a description that St. Bonaventure wrote of St. Francis once, I think is very apt for Michael. St. Bonaventure said that St. Francis had a bent for compassion, and certainly Michael Judge did. The other thing about Michael Judge is he loved to be where the action was. If he heard a fire engine or a police car, any news, in the car he'd go and away he'd be off. He loved to be where people were active, where there was a crisis, so he could insert God in what was going on. That was his way of doing things. I remember once I came back to the Friary and the secretary told me there's a hostage situation in Karlstadt and Michael Judge is up there. So I said, oh gosh. So I got in the car, drove up there.
As we hear Chaplain Michael Judge eulogized, I also wanted to point out today that New York City also lost its fire chief in all of this, Peter Gansey, who had spent more than 30 years with the New York City Fire Department. New York also lost its first deputy commissioner, William Feehan, who had spent almost 40 years with the department. And once again, both of those were among the hundreds of firefighters killed in the initial attack of the South Tower, and then after, of course, the second tower collapsed. At this same time in Arlington, Virginia, mourners are gathering at the Cathedral of St. Thomas More to honor Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson.
We hastily organized a holy hour for Wednesday evening. We had no way to advertise it, so we spread the news by word of mouth, hoping to get a group of people there to pray. More than 400 people showed up. And after it was over, I went out to greet the people, and nobody came. Went in, took off my vestments, went out again. Nobody came out. They stayed 10 minutes in the church praying. Every one of them. Praying for the nation, for those who died and who are injured, for those who are missing, and praying for Barbara. The last days in my parish, and I'm certain other parish, I know it's true here, the phone's been ringing off from people, not asking, demanding spiritual help, confession, masses. As Dr. Billy Graham said yesterday at the National Cathedral, perhaps a spiritual rebirth is taking place. There's something happening in America, and it's something good. God pulls good out of evil. Then there are those more than 50 New York policemen and 300 firemen who are probably dead. They gave their lives to save others. What heroism! What love! Greater love no man has than that he laid down his life for those he loves. In the midst of the rubble, signs of love, signs of the power of life, the finger of God writing straight with crooked lines. During the devastation of World War II, Pope Pius XII said, "The future belongs to those who love, not to those who hate." Barbara Olson, full of life, cheerful, laughing, smiling, loving, was the opposite of the dark powers that brought her death. But their evil deed was in vain. We are people of life, and no terrorist, no matter how powerful, can take that away. As Pope John Paul II has said, when God gives life, he gives it forever. We believe in the resurrection of the body at the last day, but we Catholics also believe that the soul is immortal. It cannot be destroyed. We believe that Barbara Olson is alive, not just in our hearts and in our memories, but actually alive, fully conscious and aware, now. We know this because Christ is risen from the dead. And if it isn't true, if Barbara is really gone and gone forever...
Some powerful words about how the nation is reacting to this crisis that has unfolded in this country. You see scenes like this, or have at least over the last 24 hours, repeated across the country. The president declaring yesterday a day of respect and remembrance. Reverend Billy Graham yesterday saying during the National Prayer Service, where President Bush was in attendance, and this is an exact quote, "But how do we understand something like this? Why does God allow evil like this to take place?" Perhaps this is what you're asking now. You may even be angry at God. I want to assure you that God understands those feelings that you may have. So Americans all across the country have gone to their places of worship, whether it's a synagogue, a mosque, a church, to try to find some sustenance during this very tough time. And perhaps one part of the city where there is some reassuring news comes from the Jacob Javits Center, where people continue to pour in from all over the country to volunteer their services. Bill Hemmer has been there all day long, and I know, Bill, you reported to us early on, you have been overwhelmed by the level of support these people are showing.
Indeed, Paula, we were up here well before the sun came up today. We saw hundreds, if not thousands of people, volunteers who are still standing in line in case their services are needed. I want to bring you up to date on a bit of news, though. New York's deputy mayor just a short time ago held a press conference, and he indicated at this time that they need no more volunteers, that they are okay in that area. Let's listen to the deputy mayor now.
The missing reports is now at 4,972. We had a few incidents through the evening. One attempted burglary at Brooks Brothers down in the site area. A couple people were arrested for trespassing, and someone was arrested for stealing a fireman's jacket. We're going to increase the policing of the area. Starting this afternoon, there will be anti-crime and street crime units in there. As the deputy mayor indicated, we are really, as much as we appreciate the volunteers, we are now going to limit the volunteers. We don't really need any more, and that goes in the area of police officers as well. I'd like to ask for the cops that are here from other jurisdictions and municipalities and states that they understand. I know everybody came here for the purpose of helping at the site, but our needs at the site right now are being addressed.
Again, the police commissioner, I apologize, it was not the deputy mayor, but the police commissioner making that announcement. No more volunteers needed at this time. Indeed, they have plenty of people down at the site, but still, the volunteers are here. I tell you the other thing that's here, Paula, quite obviously, the donations have been absolutely astounding. This is just one small street corner here. The water, the food, the clothing has been overwhelming. In fact, what you can't see, just about a block from where we are, we just took a short walk here, there are tents and tents of this same situation here where they've just been overloaded. Tell you what they do need, though. They're telling us they need boots, they need gloves, they need respirators, especially the kind that treat asbestos, the canisters that can be replaced. They're saying at this point, anything short of that, it's running out too quickly down there at the site. They said they also need safety goggles because the dust continues to come up in the rescuers' eyes. To a lesser degree, they're looking for insoles, things like foot powder and vapor rub. So that's what they're trying to get more of here at this particular point. The excess, the overflow, the food and water is being sent across the river here to New Jersey and Giant Stadium, where it's being held for a time. Now, that's the situation right now, and they have said and put up signs that they do not need any more donations of that nature at this time, but the other things we mentioned, like boots and gloves and goggles, certainly are needed at this time. Let's go further south to CNN's Martin Savage, also on the streets of Manhattan, who's working another end of the story this morning. Marty, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Bill, and we are a couple of blocks away from your location. We're actually at a site that is Reed and Greenwich Street. It's about 3 blocks north of, well, where the World Trade Center used to be. You can probably see, and I'll actually get out of the way so you have a better view. If you look down the street here, you can see what remains, a portion at least, of the World Trade Center complex The building in the front there is what remains of building number 7. That was one of the smaller, lower buildings. And then all around it, blocked from view because of the surviving buildings, is the debris. It's really hard to give you a clear perspective. To try to wrap your arms visually around this is extremely difficult. You've seen the aerials, you've seen the tops, visuals from the tops of buildings, but it's only when you get on the ground and you look at it head on that it really, really strikes you. And again, the images just don't do it justice. You can see that it continues to burn. There was a lot of material in there, according to firefighters, that is causing those fires to drag on. They've been dousing it with water, been doing that all this morning. Steam and smoke is what is rising into the air. They say the reason for what those fires is the fact there's a lot of fuel in there, a lot of plastics, a lot of things are melting. It's a very intense, very hot fire. It is also a fire that burns slowly because it doesn't get a lot of oxygen because of all the material that is there. And that news conference you were showing us from the police there, that goes back to what we have been reporting earlier, that there is an effort underway on the recovery and the rescue effort to make it a more professional effort. That is not to demean or put down anyone who came in here to volunteer. It's just that they are getting to the point now where the heavy work is really going to begin. The lifting of girders, the moving of steel, the moving of concrete. It's got to be exact, it's got to be precise, and it's all got to be carefully orchestrated. Yes, there's still a need for the bucket brigades, but more and more it's going to be the needs for the cranes. It's going to need for the pipe fitters, for the iron workers, because this is where they get into the area. They've cleared the periphery. Now they're moving into the real debris zones, and quite frankly, the hope is very strong that someone can be found there. And they want to do it right, and they want to do it quickly. And so there is frustration. We saw some people here complaining they couldn't get in. They had come a long way. They wanted to get there and do the work. But right now they are focusing on specific contractors with the city to do this job and try to get it done properly. You can understand people want to do anything when they feel like they feel so helpless at this particular point, Bill.
Indeed they do. Marty, thank you. And on that same note, I want to take you across the street here. This is a local union for the New York City area. This is a specialty union here that goes with hazardous material handling. They go in and look for asbestos, other type of chemicals, and also the gruesome task of finding, locating, and removing body parts from inside the rubble as well. They've been waiting here for about 3 hours. They are telling us that they have been permission to go further south on the island, to go into the area, but they have not been given the A-OK just yet from FEMA. More on this momentarily, but we are on the west side of Manhattan at this staging point. On the east side of Manhattan, CNN's Elizabeth Cohen now, again outside the Armory this morning. Elizabeth, good morning. Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Right. I can, Bill. Now I can hear you. Bill, we're here at the Armory where since Wednesday, families have been coming to register information about their missing loved ones. They're asking for every detail about them. And then starting today, the authorities have been taking DNA samples from close family members so that it can be so the DNA can be cross-matched with any remains that are seen. Let's take a look at what this corner is like. This has become there's a ground zero downtown for the physical devastation. This is a ground zero further uptown for the emotional devastation. There are posters everywhere. People are posting pictures, physical details, phone numbers of their loved ones, hoping, praying, hoping, as one person said, against hope, that someone will have seen them. Now, we've talked to countless people since we've been standing on this corner ever since Wednesday, and up until around today, everyone we've talked to has had hope. Let's hear from a woman who we talked to on Wednesday and about who she's looking for.
We're just, getting her face out there so everyone can find her. And we've covered all the hospitals and have her on the missing persons. And everyone's here to support us, so it's great. So we just have to find her. We know we will.
And we have here with us a grief counselor. Barbara Debs is a licensed psychologist from Rochester. You came down here to work with a psychology from Rochester, and you came to do counseling with people. Can you tell me, do people still have as much hope as they did 3 days ago?
No, I don't think they do. If, as the days move on, I think people are just one day closer to perhaps having to accept that they're not going to find the person they're looking for.
You were telling me earlier that on Wednesday that people were offered counseling, and many of them said, no, I want to go out, I want to go to the hospitals and look for people. Are people accepting counseling more now?
It feels that way to me, yes, definitely.
Okay. What do people want to talk about? Do they want to talk about how they're feeling, or do they want to describe their loved one to you?
Most of them talk about both how they're doing and talk to us about the person that they're looking for, and what the circumstances are at home. As a Red Cross disaster mental health person, we have training to try to discern what kind of support groups people have outside of the Compassion Center over here. Do you have family here? Do you have close friends here? Making sure that they have somebody that they can talk to when they leave here. Many of them are comfortable being here because I think it feels like they're doing something, and they're starting to reach out to one another too, which is great to see.
You mentioned that one woman said she didn't want to go home. Tell me why she didn't want to go home.
She told me that she didn't want to go home because she felt like she would be abandoning her husband.
You also mentioned a man who worked across the street. Tell me about him.
Just briefly, a man who worked across the street he was in a tower across the street. His wife was in one of the Trade Center towers, and she's pregnant with their first child, and he made it out, and he doesn't know yet whether she did, but there's not a great deal of hope.
Okay, thank you. Barbara Debs, a psychologist from Rochester, New York, who came down here to help people in New York City. She has heard hundreds of these stories, and there are thousands more. Back to you.
Thousands and thousands more. Elizabeth, thank you. Quickly, just because I think it's very critical at this point, Michael Watts is from Queens. He's the supply manager. You regulate what comes in and what comes out. Tell us again what you need at this point.
Right now, what I need is boots, work shoes, anything with steel toes, goggles, gloves.
How is that response, Michael? Is it coming in?
The response is coming in. It's amazing the way that people are responding to these things. We received within the hour probably about maybe a good 5,000 respirators, different types of respirators, but the one we're basically looking for are the asbestos. Asbestos ones is like the high priority, along with the goggles and boots and heavy work gloves.
I know you're just working this corner at 34th and 11th Avenue, but do you know where people can give and contribute?
Yes, Yankee Stadium. They can go to Yankee Stadium. Not Yankee Stadium. The Giant Stadium is one of them, because we have a staging area set up over here now for a lot of the trucks a lot of the stuff that we're not taking that we're become so overwhelmed with. We have to send stuff to Giant Stadium to store.
But as far as water and food at this point, you don't need it.
Water and food is not needed right now. We have more water here as there is debris downtown.
Okay, Michael, we'll talk again shortly. Okay,
Thank you very
Michael
much.
Watts from Queens. We'll talk to you in a moment. Okay. Paula, again, the donations are appreciated, but they want to make sure they get the right donations at this point. Back up to you above the streets of Manhattan now.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you say that, because even as all of you were speaking, and we dipped in and out of that, the New York Police Commissioner Carrick was talking about how the unbelievable outpouring of support from folks all over the country is in fact clogging up logistics. So I guess he's telling us all to stand down for a while and, let's get this stuff sorted out. I want to go back to Martin Savage now, and I want you to stand by, Bill and Elizabeth, because I know it's hard to process everything you've seen in short reports. Martin, is there anything else you want to add to what you have witnessed this morning that you didn't get into your last report?
Well, I guess if you're sort of asking me my final thoughts, I'm still stuck on my beginning thoughts, and it is the beginning. I think that's one of the things that has struck me here, is that as you look back on that debris, as you look back on the job, this is, as far as this rescue operation, this is sort of a military operation unto itself. It is logistically positioning itself for the big push to go in there and dig. This is not a process that is going to be over in a few days. This is a process that goes on for a long time. The hardest thing of all is going to be, when do you finally call it? When do you say that this is not search and rescue, this is recovery? And my bet is it will be a long time before anyone makes that call. Paula?
Yeah, well, what you are saying right now mirrors what Mr. Carrick just said moments ago, and he basically confirmed that there are still pockets of open space under the fallen World Trade Center towers that continues to give them hope that survivors might still be found. What level of optimism is there down there that could potentially be the case?
Well, optimism is not a science, obviously, and it's difficult to say. It can vary from individual to individual that you talk to. I think a lot of people are still optimistic, and it's not that hard to see why. If you look at, say, Building 7 in the background there, yes, it's smoldering in its collapse, but you could also see perhaps the opportunity that there could be voids. There could be a place, perhaps, that someone could survive. And then you have to keep in mind that beneath the World Trade Center complex was a huge and very deep complex of underground levels. I think it goes down at least 6 levels, and that's actually deeper than 6 stories. So hope is not gone yet, and shouldn't be gone in the minds of many. And certainly, it's not gone in the minds of those who are working so desperately down at the site. Paula?
And Elizabeth Cohen, I think you can elaborate on this, but the feeling I've gotten this morning from interviewing folks who are desperately looking for family members is that they haven't given up hope. I don't know whether you were able to listen to that interview I did with Linda Perry, whose husband Rick Thorpe is missing. But, you know, she poignantly described how he was in the South Tower, which was the first tower that was hit, and actually called her to tell her what he was looking at. And during the course of one of their conversations, she heard the PA announcement telling everybody to stand by. And then she was screaming onto the phone, you know, get out of there now. And based on the contact or lack of contact she has with him, she's not sure whether he ever attempted to leave that floor. Elizabeth, how many stories have you heard like that this morning, where people, even given, you know, these facts that they've got right now, won't give up?
Over the past 3 days, Paula, I have heard so many stories like that of people who were in Tower 2 who, after the first explosion, called their families, said, don't worry about me, I'm okay, they're telling us to stay. And these people are obviously confused, more confused, I think, than angry about why they were told to stay. And in fact, one woman said that her husband's secretary said, I'm not going to listen to them, I'm out of here, and that her husband's secretary is alive and that her husband is missing.
Bill, I want to thread you back into this conversation. I know you reported earlier this morning that there were so many supplies coming in there. The folks in charge didn't even know what to do with it, and you interviewed a man that quite impressed me, who for 3 days in a row has been lined up hour after hour, and he still hasn't been given anything to do. Are those people taking seriously now the message that the city's giving them that, you know, we appreciate your help, but you know, stay out of here. You're messing up some of our coordination of efforts here?
To be quite honest with you, I think the words trickled through just yet, Paula. It may momentarily, especially after the interview we just had with the police commissioner. The man you just mentioned, though, a fellow by the name of Craig, he came here from Arkansas, drove up here all the way to try and pitch in. He was told just about an hour ago that he could move down the block here and be stationed with about 100 others. They were told anyway that it's quite possible that they would catch a bus and head south. But to be quite honest with you, Paula, we've been here for 6 hours. We have not seen any volunteers being taken out of here or headed down. And you heard Martin Savage report, and as we've been saying throughout the morning here, it appears that a handful of companies, maybe 4 or 5, have been singled out in Manhattan to take their workers and allow them to go in order not to demean, again, as Marty was mentioning, the work of any volunteers here, but just in order to take more of a grip and to handle the situation. In a manner of speaking, one could assume that the city of New York is starting to take much greater control. Again, we were told on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and up until about Thursday evening, the scene on the streets here in many locations in Manhattan had been one of chaos. It appears, though, that a firmer grip on organization has taken hold, and one would assume that that is good news anyway for the rescue efforts and especially the removal efforts down there in the lower part of the island. That would be a good thing at this point. But again, volunteers here, it's quite obvious they want to help, and they have not been called on. And that's a decision the officials in charge are making at this point. They don't need their help. But nonetheless, it probably makes them feel very good inside that they can show their support in this way.
All right, Bill Hemmer, Martin Savage, Elizabeth Cohen, thank you very much for your reflection. We will continue to come back to you through the day to get updates from your individual locations. As a footnote to what we were just talking about, charities are now asking for cash, no more food. Many are running out of space to store the overwhelming donations of goods. Right now, we're going to take you to the funeral of Chaplain Michael Judge, the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department. If you weren't with us earlier, among those attending the funeral, former President Clinton, the junior senator from New York, Hillary Clinton, their daughter Chelsea. Chelsea, by the way, it has now been confirmed, was just about 12 blocks away from the World Trade Center during both of those attacks. Once again, it's particularly heartbreaking to talk about Chaplain Michael Judge. He was administering last rites to a fallen firefighter who was called to duty in the aftermath of the crashes into the World Trade Center. And during that process, he himself lost his life.
Heaven. And so with all the choirs of angels in heaven, we proclaim your glory and join in their unending hymn of praise. Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of power, God of might, and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who is in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Father, you are holy indeed, and all creation rightly gives you praise. All life, all holiness comes from you, through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, by the working of the Holy Spirit. From age to age you gather a people to yourself, so that from east to west a perfect offering may be made to the glory of your name. And so, Father, we bring you these gifts. We ask you to make them holy by the power of your Spirit, that they may become the body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at whose command we celebrate this Eucharist. On the night he was betrayed, he took bread and gave you thanks and praise. He broke the bread, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you." When supper was ended, he took the cup. Again he gave you thanks and praise, gave the cup to his disciples, and said, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me." Let us proclaim the mystery of faith. Father, calling to mind the death your Son endured for our salvation, his glorious resurrection and ascension into heaven, and ready to greet him when he comes again, we offer you in thanksgiving this holy and living sacrifice. Look with favor on your church's offering, and to see the
There
victims'
is never
death is
any
reconciled us to your
appropriate time to drop out of a service like this at the St. Francis of Assisi Church. But unfortunately, there are more memorials that we need to cover today. Just a quick note before we move on. Normally, parishioners would be packing this church, and thousands of firefighters would be here to honor the chaplain. But the cold, hard reality is they're all working this morning. There are representatives from the fire department, of course, here this morning, but certainly the brethren and sisters that would normally turn out for this kind of service cannot be there today. We now are going to take you back to the Cathedral of St. Thomas More, where a memorial service is now underway for Barbara Olson, a woman that is very familiar to CNN viewers, an attorney, an author, a friend. She is the husband of Solicitor General Ted Olson. This service this morning being presided over by Father Franklin Martin McAfee. Let's pause for a moment.
You who dwell in the shelter of the Lord, who abide in his shadow for life, say to the Lord, my refuge, my rock in whom I trust, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. The snare of the fowler will never capture you, and famine will bring you no fear. Under his wings your refuge, his faithfulness your shield, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. You need not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day. Though thousands fall about you, near you it shall not come, and he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold
As you watch this scene of friends and relatives and colleagues of Barbara Olson taking communion, I wanted to call notice to something you might have seen at the bottom of your screen, and it's a fact that actually has provided a great deal of information to the folks investigating this. Barbara was on the flight that had taken off from Dulles. It was intended to go to Los Angeles, but instead, of course, ended up crashing into the Pentagon. The information that she shared with her husband by cell phone is critical to this investigation. She confirmed to her husband hijackers were on board. She described the weapons they were using, the box cutters, the knives, which of course help investigators better understand how these suspected hijackers actually got on these planes in the first place. Once again, no one really understands how anyone had the presence of mind that Barbara had to be able to make those kinds of phone calls. But she will be sorely missed by her colleagues, her friends, her husband, her family. I'm going to take you now to a graphic, and it's an important one for all of us to absorb. It is a website called missingatcnn.com. If you've been watching any of Elizabeth Cohen's reports from the Armory this morning, where family members of the missing are meeting, it is critical that the folks that are assisting in the search understand who they're looking for. So if you know of someone who's missing, you should feel free to download their pictures to this website, and the hope is that in somehow, some way, this will assist in the search. We know that hundreds of folks who have been injured were taken to various hospitals around the metro area, and we've had guests on the air describing how they've gone from hospital to hospital to track folks down. So once again, that web address is missingatcnn.com. Let's go back now to Atlanta, where Miles O'Brien continues to stand by. Hello again.
Hello again, Paula. Among the latest developments we have for you this morning, President Bush met with his advisors about military options in response to Tuesday's attacks. Pakistan says it will assist the U.S. if military action is taken against Afghanistan. That's a critical statement there. Pakistan is considered closely allied with Osama bin Laden and his cells of terrorists. This is despite, however, an earlier warning from the rulers of Afghanistan, the Taliban, about retaliation against neighbors who helped the U.S., Pakistan right next door to Afghanistan. The death toll from those attacks now stand at 185. Some 4,717 people are missing. Clearly that death toll will rise. More funeral masses will unfortunately be held. President Bush is currently huddling with his senior advisors, considering different military options. In today's regular radio address, Mr. Bush began preparing Americans for a protracted fight against terrorism. He said he would not settle for a token response, but instead would insist on a powerful and sustained campaign against terrorists and those who harbor them. The painful task of recovering bodies from the World Trade Center and the Pentagon continues around the clock, rain or shine. So far, as we have said, 185 confirmed deaths, 4,700 people reported missing. Many of their names and faces posted throughout the city. As we told you, those faces can be sent to our website at missingatcnn.com. They will be posted there. But given the nature of this event and the magnitude of it, it is feared the vast majority of them are now dead. There is some hope that in the sub-basements there could be some survivors. Missingatcnn.com. 189 people are presumed dead in the attack on the Pentagon. Meanwhile, that includes military and civilian employees who were in the building, as well as the passengers on the plane, American Airlines 77, on which was Barbara Olson. A United Airlines 737 bound for Chicago was the first flight out of Boston's Logan Airport today since the attack. The airport reopened for the service this morning. When all the air traffic in the country was shut down, it was among the airports, of course, affected by the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. The two hijacked planes that struck the World Trade Center, as you will recall, took off from Logan Airport. Only Reagan National Airport near the Pentagon remains closed this morning. Let's now take it to John King, who is in Washington and who has been watching what is going on at the White House this morning. And John, I was a couple of things from the president's statement earlier. First of all, I thought it was very significant that this first time he mentioned the name of Osama bin Laden and mentioned him as the prime suspect, but also really got the sense, he used the term "we are at war," and getting the nation ready for something which would really test the nation's resolve. What were your thoughts on that?
Exactly right, Miles. The president up at Camp David meeting with his national security team. This has been a very difficult week for the president. First learning of these attacks when he was in Florida, having to juggle competing roles, if you will, trying to reassure the nation that the government is up and running, trying to console the nation at this time of remarkable grief, at the same time trying also to keep a firm hand on the investigation and the options being presented to him by his military advisors. As you mentioned, the president up at Camp David for the weekend. At that meeting today, some very stern words from the president as he meets with that national security team to discuss potential military responses.
There's no question about it. This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring them to justice. We will not only deal with those who dare attack America, we will deal with those who harbor them and feed them and house them. Make no mistake about it. Underneath our tears is the strong determination of America to win this war. And we will win it.
Now, one critical element for a president at a time of crisis is the support of the United States Congress. The Congress has responded this week in an overwhelmingly bipartisan manner, approving $40 billion in emergency spending for the relief, the recovery efforts, the early stages of the investigation, and some military buildup as well, the call-up of the reserves. For one, the Congress also passing with just one dissenting vote a resolution authorizing the president to use force to retaliate if he deems that necessary. But as our CNN congressional correspondent Kate Snow notes, even amid all these debates, it's not just about the business of the Congress. For some members, the events of recent days have taken a painful personal toll.
Joseph Crowley is a congressman representing Queens and the Bronx, but he's also from a family of firefighters and police officers, a family missing one of their own. The congressman's cousin, New York Fire Battalion Chief John Moran.
John is a wonderful husband and the father of 2 small children, beautiful boys.
Duty put Moran at the World Trade Center Tuesday morning. His brother Michael called him. Terrorists had just flown a second plane into the South Tower. Michael told him to be careful. I know, I saw it, John told his brother. No one knows if he went inside. No one knows where he is now. The next day, the congressman toured the area. Someone constituents rely on for answers finds himself, like so many other Americans, helpless.
Under these circumstances, when you're talking about the magnitude of over 300 firefighters and police officers and emergency technicians who are lost, not to mention the possibly hundreds and thousands of people that are missing right now, that doesn't matter who you are, and no one is exempt from the pain and the anguish of having to wait for that information.
Unlike other Americans, Crowley has the power to make law, his grief reinforcing his resolve.
I'm a pretty tolerant guy, but I have really strong feelings about the people who did this, and I haven't really, I don't think I've actually taken it all in yet, and I want something to be done.
John Moran was already a hero in Queens. On Father's Day, he helped fight a fire that killed 3 men. At that time, he told Dateline NBC, the firefighter performs one act of bravery in his career, and that's when he takes the oath of office. After that, everything else is in the line of duty.
My cousin John. That's all the firemen and firewomen and firefighters, police officers, all these people are very special people. We don't give them enough due. And you can multiply John Moran by 300 more people. There are heroes here that people will never know.
Kate Snow, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Now joining me now, another member of the New York congressional delegation, Congressman Tom Reynolds, a Republican. Tough to watch that piece, isn't it?
It is tough to watch it, and I went up with Joe yesterday, and so many stories like that, not just members of Congress that know people from New York, as I and others have, but the country. Whether they went to college at Princeton, as one friend of mine said, or they worked together in another part of New York, and now they know that those people are missing in the city. All this coverage for a week has been devastating to watch. But when you go there and you know the World Trade Center and the symbol of what that is of capitalism and the strength of democracy in America, and see it gone as a landmark, to see the rubble. But you talk to the spirit of those firemen and those cops and those emergency workers, and they say they're working around the clock because they believe that there's pockets of airspace down there that brings the hope of life for rescue in what is about 5 to 7 stories below the ground. We think of Ground Zero with the rubble that's now piled on where the World Trade Center was, but there's so much down below it. And to see the spirit as they worked, and as they stopped moments to chant USA to the president, and the president kind of exchanging that hope and support. It was a tremendous thing to see. But the most important thing is the commitment of those rescue workers, as Joe Crowley said, the heroes, the firemen and the cops and emergency workers who, one, lost their life, and two, are still working there to find those who are still alive.
The president said he was struck by the anger as he was shaking hands, and you were up there with him, of the firefighters, people telling him, you know, go get them, retaliate. What's taking so long?
This country's ready for retaliation.
Do you think, though, that those firefighters, those rescue workers, your colleagues in the Congress, understand that what the president is considering here could involve a sustained military campaign with ground troops?
Well, I think that's the process over the next couple days and weeks to convey to America what I think we in Congress know is that you don't take a resolution that passed almost unanimous last night with only one dissenting vote on use of force and have the type of latitude the Congress gave the president without knowing that that is a very significant step towards bringing justice through retaliation.
The last time a major scene of terrorism in this country, it was a domestic act of terrorism in Oklahoma City. The site of that tragic bombing now turned into a memorial. As you were walking through the rubble up at the World Trade Center yesterday, what should be done at that site? Rebuild an office tower, a memorial?
John, it's so early to know. The important thing is to try to get the debris and rubble cleared away so we can find people who may be alive, and the ability to bury our dead. But you don't really replace the World Trade Center in the image of what that was for the last 30 years in the skyline of New York. And that'll be up to the people of New York and this country as we move forward. But right now we've got to rescue the people that are alive and bury our dead and move towards bringing the perpetrators to justice.
All right, Tom Reynolds, Congressman from New York, we thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Now back to Paula Zahn, standing by in Manhattan.
Thanks so much, John. There has been much debate about what impact this tragedy will ultimately have on the economy. We are already beginning to see its toll. Continental Airlines announced today because of the expected drop-off in air travel, it is going to cut its schedule by 20% and furlough 12,000 people. It's important to note that Republican and Democratic leaders in the House have already agreed in principle to a $2.5 billion emergency bailout package for U.S. airlines in an industry that wasn't very healthy going into this. They are very concerned because of all the flight cancellations that many major airlines could face bankruptcy. It was estimated in the New York Times today that these airlines have lost anywhere from $100 million a day to $275 million a day. So I guess for the folks that study this stuff, this announcement from Continental Airlines does not come as a great surprise. You have seen how people from all over the country who have come to New York offering their services. We wanted to give you an idea of how people in other parts of the country are reacting to the tragic news coming out of Pennsylvania, coming out of New York and Washington, D.C. And for that, we go to Jeff Flock, who is standing by in Des Moines. Where are you right now, Jeff?
Well, Paula, fittingly enough, I am at a fire station here in Des Moines, Iowa, where earlier this morning some of the men you see behind me were gathered around a television watching the funeral mass for one of their own. Reports of an entire engine company lost in New York, went to the fire, didn't come back. Can you even conceive of that this morning, standing here in Des Moines, Iowa, at your fire station?
It's very hard for us to fathom the fact that they lost a great number of firefighters.
The city of Des Moines has approximately 287 firefighters, and to lose a whole company, it's just unreal.
As you look at that funeral, and each of you out here with a black ribbon on to symbolize that, you told me the loss of any one firefighter anywhere in the nation, but this enormity of loss.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's hard to imagine. You know, we sit around, we watch the coverage of this, and we don't even know what to say. You know, we're totally in awe. It's hard to imagine. Our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody, the rescuers and the people who have lost their lives. And
I've got to ask you, as firefighters, since the events of this week, when the bell rings, when you have news of a explosion or a fire, now what goes through your mind differently from what went through it before?
Well, I think we've always had the thought in the back of our mind that a tragedy could happen, that we always have to be aware of what's going on around us. I think now we'll probably be a little more aware, maybe take an extra second to think about what we're doing and what's going on, just to make sure that we stay as safe as possible.
In terms of where things go from here, I know this gentleman, you're a reservist, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
And certainly many firefighters across this nation are also in the reserves. What's your unit? And we're talking about calling up, the U.S. is, tens of thousands of reservists. Are you ready to go, and what would you do?
Yes, sir. I'm a member of the 194th Long Range Surveillance Detachment of the Iowa National Guard. And if they do call us up, more than willing and able to go. I served in Iraq during Desert Storm, and I know I'm ready to go. And if the President calls for that.
And lastly, what should the response be?
I think it should
Jeff,
be strong.
I hate to do this to you, but Justice Clarence Thomas is now eulogizing Barbara Olson at her memorial service in Virginia.
Events of a lifetime was horrific enough. Then, as so many in this wonderful country, to have personal grief piled abruptly and unmercifully upon that horror is so very difficult. But even through destruction's debris, death cannot be proud. For in the words of the poet John Donne, one short sleep past, we wake eternally. On this earth, Barbara strided boldly through life, full of cheer and verve, shying from no challenge or obstacle. She was irrepressible in the fullest sense. What seemed an impediment to most was but a pebble to Barbara. On matters of principle, there was something Churchillian about her and about her attitude, ignoring all torpedoes and charging full speed ahead, but doing so with grace and charm. Though I did not know her at the time, she charged headlong into the fray to defend me during the difficulties of my confirmation to the court. Yet in the almost 10 years that I have known her, she never saw fit to mention this to me, to mention the fact that she had helped me during a difficult time. That is so characteristically Barbara, giving much, expecting nothing in return. Barbara and Ted are as one in our lives, two hearts beating as one. They are inseparable. Even those final minutes of crisis and finality could not separate them, nor will death do so. For Barbara's spirit survives in each of us, just as the spirit of our great country lives on. She lives in our memories, now dampened by tears and made hazy by grief. But she's here, her ever-present high heels clicking across the floors of this cathedral and through all the passageways of our sentiments. In 1983, when my grandparents died within 1 month of each other, life seemed without purpose. With God's help and His guidance, I vowed to live the remainder of my life as a monument to theirs and to that spirit that infused their lives. Let us, as friends of Ted and Barbara, live our lives with that spirit that filled and animated her life, that wonderful spirit that is yet one more gift she has left as a part of her legacy. We are all better for having known her, and we will all be better for remembering her and incorporating her spirit into our lives. Indeed, that spirit will be required to overcome what is now before us and what lies ahead. She gave her last full measure. We must do likewise. Lord, give her eternal rest and let her share your glory. Amen.
It is rare to see a Supreme Court justice speak publicly. It is certainly